So Eimear, we've been let run wild, you and me, on the podcast today.
I know, yeah, we're going to talk about, we'll do about 10 podcasts.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this very funny story of, it's, it is a sad story, but it's a very funny story of a woman called Margaret Bergin. She's from Laois, she's a mother of 3. And she recently got out of prison. She was given a sentence of 5 years, 3.5 suspended. She ended up spending 6 years in prison in the Doka Centre. Yeah. Tell us why.
Yeah, so basically Margaret Bergin is a 73-year-old woman. So she's a grandmother, she's a mother of 3, and we've covered this case. Patrick O'Connell for the Sunday World's covered this case a lot. So, you see pictures of her online. She does not look like somebody who would be spending a lot of time in prison. But she basically pleaded guilty to 10 counts of theft and 5 counts of larceny in relation to this shocking story. Essentially, she was claiming her dead father-in-law's pension for over 28 years. And the value totaled €270,000 by the end. So she was his carer at the end of his life, and he died in 1993. So she would have been entitled to, sign off and get his pension, but obviously while he was still alive. So he passed away, and for this period of time, nearly 30 years, she continued to claim it. And what happened, I suppose it is a bit of a shocking story, but I suppose the funny elements or the quirky elements are how she was discovered. So essentially, fast forward to 2022, and this genterologist who basically looks into aging of people, does loads of research in that regard, was looking up this and said, oh my God, there's a 110-year-old man in Laois. Like, he'd be the oldest person in Ireland. So did a bit more research and contacted the President's office, who then passed it on to the Department of Social Protection. And they looked into it and they couldn't find any death cert for this person. His name was John Bergin. And were extremely confused. And then they started to contact Margaret Bergin, and it took a while to chase her down. Like, she's leaving voicemails, giving them excuses like, I can't bring him to meet. So obviously Department of Social Protection personnel were looking to meet them then. And she was like, oh, he has diarrhea at one stage. Another stage, she was like, I have to bring him to a dental appointment. So basically, at one point they turned up at her door, and she got a very, sort of not suspicious, but she obviously was taken aback. And basically they were brought into the house, and she said, hang on a second. And they brought her upstairs. She brought them upstairs, and she introduced them to this man in a bed who had shoes on. So they were like, this man is much younger, doesn't look like John Bergin. And transpired it was Margaret Bergin's husband. So then the Gardaí were involved then, and when she was in interview with them, she admitted that, she did claim his pension and said that, my husband I put it on him really quickly about, to get into bed. He had nothing to do with it. So she was brought to court, and she, pleaded guilty to these offences. And it went on for a while because she was basically asked to pay back the money. I think she paid back a certain amount and then was asked for more. So in the end, she paid back $75,000, and she apologised profusely. But essentially, the judge was like, I have to give you a prison sentence. So she was jailed for, she got a 5.5-year sentence with 3.5 suspended. So she was given a 2-year sentence. But I suppose what's put it into the news for us is that Patrick had a story on Sunday that Margaret Bergin is now out of prison. So she served 6 weeks. So basically a week for 45 grand that she stole. So she was in a Doka Centre, which would be, some of Ireland's most notorious killers, female killers would be in there. So she was 73 years of age, and she was basically released under a community care order, which is essentially overcrowding. This person isn't a violent person, has no history of this, isn't a threat to society. So, she's obviously been released under certain conditions, but she's out again, essentially.
Yeah, and as part of this as well, as part of the case, it wasn't just the money. So obviously in Ireland, the president on your 100th birthday, should you live to 100, will send you a cheque. And in this case, John Bergin had received a cheque of €2,540 from the president for his 100th birthday. And every year as well, you get a coin kind of commemorating each year. So they had 10 of these coins. Now they found the cheque was in the house uncashed. Now, a solicitor for the court solicitor for Miss Bergin, told the court that they actually had no interest in keeping the coins or anything like that. And they were ordered to return them to Áras an Uachtaráin, as well as the letters, congratulating him for his birthday, and any of the cheque as well. And these weren't part of the prosecution, but they were ordered to send them back. There was also quite an interesting part of this was the fact that she had said that they had no money really available for her to pay back the rest of the funds. Obviously, like you said, she paid that 75,000, and she was said that she would be able to pay €50 a week from her state pension. But the court also heard that there was a family farm that was 99 acres. Now, it had been sold or given on to her son.
Yeah,
I believe prior to when the crime came to light. And the defence told the court that they weren't actually able to sell the land because it was part of a national strategic route. Do you know anything further about what that might be?
No, well, and either did the judge really, because he kind of said, I haven't really ever heard that before. I assume it was part of roads development, or that's what they were trying to claim. But, you know, the judge was taken aback by that and said, I haven't heard that before. And, you know, wasn't happy, and when, as I said, when she originally came to court, I think it was 35,000. He was like, no, we need more money, and then she originally came up with the 75,000, and then it was decided that she would pay a certain amount from her pension per week. But I guess you know, and a reason that she was jailed in the end as well was the length of time that she had been conducting this fraud, and you know, and the judge had made it clear that, you know, he wasn't happy about the, you know, the lack of money, that not the lack of money, but the sum of money that had been given back. And you know, she was extremely apologetic, Margaret Bergin. She said she got herself into this corner, backed into a corner, and didn't know how she could get out of it. And you know, that she was basically confined to her home, that she'd been estranged from one of her children as a result of this, from other family members, and you know, that she brought shame in her family and all of this kind of thing. So that was pleaded on her case, but I suppose in relation to the money, it didn't really stack up the defence case that they weren't able to sell the house or sell the land to recoup some of the money for the state. So I suppose there's various different things that the judge wasn't happy with, and that was certainly one of them. Yeah,
and the judge also, in part of his ruling, he said that he believed that Miss Bergin had allowed herself to be offered as a sacrificial lamb. He said that he didn't believe that she was the only person who knew about this crime.
Yeah, no, he did say that. And he also likened to, which I thought was quite quirky, he likened to a John B. Keane play or novel, because it is, like, some of the elements of it are crazy. But yeah, he did say that. And particularly when he was referencing the centenarian coins, he said that because... So obviously she pleaded guilty, she was sentenced, and then so this has only been very recently that the case about the centenarian coins came up, because basically the judge had to make an order for them to be returned to the president's office. So that was kind of a separate element to the case after she was sentenced. And when he was dealing with that, he read out his order, he read out his judgment, and he essentially said, you know, that the letter of congratulations that you've made this age, and also the coins, they were sent, obviously 10 of them, because they were sent after the age of 100 every year. He said that, you know, these were sent to the family home, you know, so it wouldn't have just been Margaret Bergin that was receiving these. It would have actually been John Bergin's next of kin, which was his son Seamus. So, you know, he was kind of saying, I don't know how nobody else in the family would have not known about this in relation to the centenarian coins. So, you know, that was no part of the Garda investigation, and nobody was charged in relation to that particular aspect of it. But he did say, you know, that it wasn't just on her in relation to those letters and the coins, that they could have been received by other family members. So he did bring that up in that particular case. And then he made the order that, you know, it was heard that Margaret and her husband had no issue with them being returned, so he made that order that they be returned to essentially the state. And it is one of those cases that it's like, I would have got away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids. Like, only had that researcher figured out that there was somebody, you know, that was 110 years old and wanted to look into it further, was that uncovered. Do you think, like, her doing something like that, like, I suppose I can understand in a sense that it was sort of something that's maybe just spiraled. She might have got 1 or 2 weeks of the pension and was like, this is nice. And it just maybe have spiraled out of control. And all of a sudden, you know, it's 30 years later and something like that is still happening and she's being prosecuted. And of course, every year you're getting the centenary letters on top of it all as well. Yeah, possibly. I suppose we never know what's going on with people. And, you know, sometimes people might be able to justify it to themselves and say, you know, it's only, you know, a certain amount of money a week and it's coming from the state. It's try and claim it's some kind of victimless crime, perhaps. And, we don't know, I'm not in no way trying to make excuses, but we don't know that, they were struggling for money at the time. As you said, it probably would have been taken a while for state records to update and for her to stop getting the money anyway. So maybe you just spiraled. But I suppose, you can argue that, what is that over 30 years going to do to the taxpayer? But I suppose if everybody was doing that, then it would really impact everybody. So I suppose you have to think of it that way. And we have seen cases like this. I was actually looking earlier, and there was a guy in Donegal. This went under the radar a lot more than Margaret Bergin did, but he essentially was using his dead brother's identity. His brother had died in England, drowned in England, but was an Irish citizen. So he was claiming his pension. He actually claimed it was a lot less of a time period. It was a lower time period. I think was up to 10 years, but he claimed 93,000 over this time. He was also claiming a medical card, medical expenses. And that only came to light when it was actually a super sleuth in the passport office. He'd applied for a passport under his dead brother's identity, and he'd sent in his dead brother's birth cert and name, but used his own photo. So then later on, when he went to apply for his own passport, whatever kind of technology in the passport office was like, this is the same photo. And then they discovered, and he's pleaded guilty to various different fraud offences as well. So, it does happen. And, people can be in tough situations, or they can, or maybe they just want to, they think they'll get a quick book and nobody will know. Exactly. And even looking at that one, back in 93, the records, and there was probably all manual paper records rather than the way it's all computerized nowadays. Yeah. And one thing I was thinking about, I was like, well, what happened to the body? Did they have a funeral? So I did a bit of digging around some of the news articles around the sentencing and the case. And Gardaí did find an overgrown grave in the name of John Jack Bergin in Clodagh, and the parish priest had said that he wasn't able to provide any records of his death, so there's nothing in the church about him, but they did do a search of the house and they found mass cards at the time of his death. So perhaps it appears that there had been a funeral, he had been buried, people knew that he was deceased. But then I was wondering, well, if there was no death cert, was that just they applied for it and they didn't get it? Was it malice that they didn't apply for it? Did they forget to apply for it? There's all these kind of questions, what's going on around that, because obviously if they hadn't applied for it, maybe it would speak to some sort of motive or knowingly doing what they're doing. But again, like you said, maybe people just justify it to themselves as a victimless crime. It could be something whereby they just get caught in a spiral and aren't really able to do much about it. But there is another incident which was very funny at the time, very sad. It was something that was not for the family, of course.
Not funny for the family, but I mean, it was parodied. We had the St. Patrick's Day parade, took their own version of the Carlow post office incident, which when I remember this story broke, I was like, I was refreshing, I think, the Irish Times, and I was like, did they post an old article by mistake? There's no way this is something that's just happened. But tell us, Eimear, about this story, because it's something the Sunday World covered a lot. Patrick O'Connell won Crime Journalist of the Year for his very funny story. I think one of the best quotes I'd seen is about when one of the perpetrators was talking about the death in this case, and he said he dropped off around the ice cream freezer. So this is the case of two men who brought a deceased man into a post office. It's one of these country post offices where the post office is kind of at the back of the shop. To collect a pension. So tell us a bit about that.
So this was back in 2022, but basically I think we did well that story on that weekend, Patrick did, because it was a Saturday. Well, it was a Friday night that it broke. I actually still remember, I think it was evening time, and some, I can't remember who it was now, calling into the news desk and saying that basically these people brought a dead body into a post office, kind of like, there was likening to Weekend at Bernie's and all this kind of thing. But obviously it was a very serious case as well, because, there's been other family members left very upset by it, understandably. So what transpired then was essentially these two guys by the name of Declan Hockney and Garrett Coakley were in a house drinking, and Declan says that he'd gone down to the post office earlier that morning. Garrett said that Declan had gone down to the post office earlier that morning to try and get his uncle Pater Doyle's pension, and they basically said he needs to come himself to get the pension. So he said Garrett Coakley has always maintained that he thought when Pater Doyle was brought to the post office that he was still alive. So Declan arrived back and said to Gareth, like, will you help me get Patrick up and we'll bring him down to the post office? Can you get me a glass of water and put his shoes on and all this kind of thing? So they arrived down to the post office. And then, obviously when they were in the post office, they had him propped up, and it transpired then that this man is not in a good state. And then the emergency services were called, and, he was Patrick Doyle was later pronounced dead. So on the Saturday, Patrick went down and had just happened to got to speak to Gareth Coakley, and it's his only interview he's ever given, and he basically went through, as you said, I thought he was alive. I was asked to bring him down, and he actually, had said that he said goodbye to Declan, his friend, at the post office, not realising what was about to transpire. That was what he told us. So fast forward, obviously, then to the following year, and they both pleaded guilty to attempted deception and were given jail sentences. Declan Hockney actually didn't serve too much longer in jail because he had remained in custody pending his sentence. So that was backdated when he was sentenced. And then Gareth was given 18 months for attempted deception, and we had the story there last year that he was out of jail, but we haven't spoken to him since. But yeah, it kind of did, I suppose, really become a massive story. And there has been, as you said, parody stories, but we did have to remember that, there was an upset family at the centre of it as well, because obviously Patrick Doyle had his own siblings and family members. So it was a really shocking case. But again, another example of, of attempts to, attempted deception anyway in relation to somebody else's pension. Yeah, I mean, it's it is a very tragic story, I mean, for his family. And the judge even said in his judgment that he could have been left at home and die peacefully in bed. No person should die in those circumstances, because of course the postmortem couldn't exactly ascertain the time of death. So, and as well, there was no evidence of foul play, but they couldn't tell if he actually did die in the post office or he had been dead previously to being brought in. Something that Gareth had said in his interview as well was that he felt like Patter was getting heavier and heavier as they were bringing him in. And the way he just, I suppose at the end, there was an eyewitness who was driving along, and she came in and she had said that he looked dead. She had no medical training, but he already looked dead. Somebody else tried to get a defibrillator, but then they realised that he had already died at that point. And Gareth Coakley, before he left, he retold this to Patrick O'Connell. He said, "I said, I'm sorry about your uncle, man. See you after. I was only doing him a favour by helping bring his uncle down to get his money." Like that interview they gave was just bizarre. And he, at the time as well, Declan Hockney or Hawney, I don't know what way you'd say it, Hawney? I would say Hockney, but I could be wrong. We've agreed to disagree. Yeah. He also attempted to sue various newspapers for how he was portrayed, but they were only quoting what he had said in interviews, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was one of those ones, I suppose, where I think it all happened very quickly, and they probably regretted in the aftermath speaking out. And obviously maybe they didn't realise the seriousness of the of what had transpired, because obviously they had both, they'd been in the house, they'd been drinking, and this had all happened very quickly. And then all of a sudden it became, the emergency services were there. So I think maybe, and we got the sense when the Sunday World spoke to Gareth Coakley, it was quite soon after he had, been speaking to the Gardaí. So so maybe in hindsight, they realised that they regretted what they had said, but they did give interviews. Gareth Coakley gave us the interview, and I suppose they did plead guilty then eventually to attempted deception. So they have both served their sentences now. But yeah, that was a factor of it as well, for sure. And this is not just, we hear all these kind of, I just fall into one of those bizarre stories that kind of captures the nation's attention because of how, it's so unlike every day. It's not something that we come across every day. And I suppose it's one of these incidents where it's not, dog bites man, it's man bites dog, with sort of with this type of thing. But you often see
there's so many people who do bizarre things like this. There was a copycat sort of thing happened in Brazil as well, in a bank where a woman had brought her uncle in to sign for a loan, and he was seen on CCTV, and she kept saying, uncle, you need to sign this. And again, there was police, there was ambulance, he was pronounced dead. And people just doing silly things like that for money. Now, whether or not they couldn't tell whether he had died in the bank or if he was dead prior to going into the bank. But I suppose it's a very interesting thing. Death fraud is its whole own sort of sanctum. People faking their own deaths. Remember Canoe Man in the UK who had as well been caught by doing that. He was found alive by doing something very stupid. I believe he'd gotten a picture taken with his wife in somewhere in South America. He had bought real estate, and the photo was put on Facebook, and people realised that he'd been alive. Basically, he left a canoe in the middle of a river or in the sea or something like that, and faked his own death essentially. And he the whole time he was living in a house next door to his wife in a secret compartment, and his son was visiting his mother every day, the grieving mother, yet he was always next door.
It's wild.
Yeah.
That's it is. I suppose we're seeing more and more kind of innovative ways of people to try and steal money or claim money that's not rightfully theirs. But I guess in these cases, maybe it is a psychological thing where people think, they're in certain circumstances where they need money, or they just think, well, this person has died, and obviously people don't necessarily see that they should have any loyalty to the state, whether that's a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think that getting a bit of money off the government is something that they should feel bad for. So I don't know if that plays into it as well, or if it's just a bit of desperation. But I suppose you would say that it's not the state, it's a taxpayer that is essentially stumping up for this money. So there is, it may maybe not be an obvious victim, but everybody can't do that. And I suppose the rest of us are going about our day trying to earn a honest living. So why do other people think that they're above that? I suppose some would question. So it is a very interesting thing, and it definitely, in terms of morality, I think people just have different ways of justifying things and different ways of looking at things. They're thinking, I'm not going out attacking anybody, causing anyone direct violence. But I guess, it is against the law at the end of the day, and these people have served serious sentences now and have serious records as a result.
Yeah, and you might look at these sort of things and say, well, I'd never do that, and fair enough. But also, again, like you said, you don't really know what somebody else's thought process is, or how somebody else might think of it, look at things morally, or even with their own goals in mind. They might have different ideation as well, and we all don't have the same norms in our own lives, and how we interact with society and go by those rules and all that sort of stuff. But Eimear, thank you so much.
Thanks, Clodagh.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.